The first shotgun blast tore through the silence of a stormy afternoon in Nebraska City, Nebraska, 1878, sending Eliza Clarke sprawling into the churning waters of the Missouri River. She hadn't expected Harlan Thorne to make good on his threats, hadn't believed any man could be so callous as to shoot a woman in cold blood for refusing his hand in marriage. But as the murky water filled her lungs and the current dragged her downstream, the second shot missing her by inches, she realized she'd gravely underestimated his cruelty. Mason Quinn had been tracking Thorne for 3 months across 2 territories. The bounty on the man's head would set him up nicely, allowing him to finally hang up his guns and purchase that plot of land outside of San Francisco he'd been eyeing. He'd followed the outlaw to this river bend, keeping a careful distance, waiting for the right moment. What he hadn't expected was to witness an attempted murder. Through the rain-soaked air, Mason heard a man's voice call out from further downriver. "She's drowning." It was another rider, a stranger who'd also witnessed the shooting. Mason spurred his horse toward the voice, seeing a tall man in a worn leather duster already dismounting near the riverbank. The stranger's weathered face tightened with determination as he stripped off his gun belt. "Then she ain't dying alone," the cowboy said, plunging into the turbulent waters without hesitation. Mason made his decision in an instant. Thorne could wait. A woman's life couldn't. He leapt from his horse and followed the cowboy into the rushing current. The water hit like ice, stealing his breath. The storm had turned the typically placid Missouri into a raging beast. 20 feet ahead, he could see the woman's blue dress billowing in the water, her pale arms thrashing weakly. The cowboy was swimming powerfully toward her, but the current was pushing them all downstream at an alarming rate. Mason struck out with powerful strokes, his muscles burning with effort. A fallen tree loomed ahead, its branches reaching into the river like skeletal fingers. If the woman was swept into that tangle, she'd be trapped underwater in seconds. The cowboy reached her first, grabbing her around the waist. But the current was too strong, dragging them both toward the deadfall. Mason changed direction, swimming diagonally to intercept them. He caught the cowboy's outstretched arm just as they were about to be swept into the branches, and with a strength born of desperation, pulled them toward the shore. They staggered onto the muddy bank together, the cowboy carrying the limp form of the woman. Her face was deathly pale, lips blue, water streaming from her sodden clothes. "She ain't breathing," the cowboy said, laying her gently on the ground. Mason knelt beside her, turning her onto her side and firmly striking her back. Nothing happened. He struck again, harder this time, and suddenly she convulsed, coughing up river water. Her eyes flew open, wild with terror. "Easy now," Mason said, supporting her as she gasped and retched. "You're safe." Her eyes, a startling shade of green, locked onto his. He tried to kill me," she managed between coughs. "Thorne?" Mason asked. Fear flashed across her face. "You know him? I've been tracking him. I'm a bounty hunter." The cowboy stood nearby, water dripping from his clothes. "Name's Fred Daly," he said. "Folks call me Fred. Saw that bastard shoot at you from my camp across the river." He nodded toward a stand of trees. "Didn't expect to be going swimming today." "Mason Quinn," Mason replied, helping the woman to sit up. "And you, madam?" "Eliza," she whispered. "Eliza Clarke." Another fit of coughing seized her, and when it passed, she looked up at both men with gratitude shining through her exhaustion. "You saved my life, both of you." "We need to get you warm," Mason said, noticing how violently she was shivering. "Thorne might circle back," Fred nodded. "My camp's not far. Got a fire going and some dry clothes you could use, madam. They'll be too big, but better than catching your death in these wet things." Mason helped Eliza to her feet. She swayed dangerously, and without thinking, he swept her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, this slip of a woman who'd nearly died twice in the span of minutes, once by bullet, once by water. "My horse is just up the bank," he said. "I'll fetch him," Fred offered, jogging up the incline. Eliza's hand clutched weakly at Mason's shirt. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you risk your life for someone you don't know?" Mason looked down at her, at the raindrops mingling with river water on her pale cheeks, at the confusion and fear and wonder in those green eyes. "Some things a man just does," he answered simply. "No thinking required." Fred returned with Mason's horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Copper. Mason settled Eliza in the saddle before mounting behind her, supporting her trembling form against his chest. "Can you lead us to your camp?" he asked Fred. The cowboy nodded, retrieving his own mount, a dapple gray with a white blaze. "This way, it's not but a quarter-mile." As they rode, Mason felt Eliza gradually relax against him, her breathing steadying. The rain was easing now, but thunder still rumbled in the distance. He kept a vigilant eye on the surroundings, wary of Thorne's possible return. "He was supposed to be my fiancé," Eliza said suddenly, her voice barely audible over the horse's hoofbeats. "Thorne?" Mason couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. The man had a reputation for many things: robbery, assault, even murder, but courtship wasn't among them. "Not his real name," she replied. "He called himself Harold Thompson when he came to Nebraska City 3 months ago, claimed to be a cattle investor from Chicago." She laughed bitterly. "My father was so impressed with his business acumen and apparent wealth. I was less convinced." "Smart woman," Fred called back over his shoulder. "Not smart enough," Eliza said. "When I finally refused his proposal outright yesterday, he changed. It was like watching a mask fall away." She shuddered. "He threatened me, said no woman had ever rejected him, and lived to tell about it. I didn't believe him. I should have." They reached Fred's camp, a simple but well-organized site beneath a stand of cottonwoods. A small fire still smoldered despite the rain, protected by a canvas lean-to. A coffee pot rested on a grate over the coals, and a bedroll was neatly arranged beside a saddle and various supplies. Fred quickly built up the fire while Mason helped Eliza dismount. Her legs buckled beneath her, and he caught her before she could fall. "Here," Fred said, pulling a clean flannel shirt and woolen trousers from his saddlebags. "They'll swallow you whole, madam, but they're dry." He gestured to the lean-to. "You can change in there, we'll keep watch." Mason helped Eliza to the shelter, then joined Fred by the fire. The cowboy was pouring coffee into a tin cup, his expression thoughtful. "Thorne's got a $1,500 bounty on his head," Mason said quietly. "Dead or alive." Fred whistled low. "That kind of money would set a man up nice." "It would," Mason agreed. "Been tracking him from Cheyenne, lost his trail twice, picked it up again near Plattsmouth." He accepted the cup of coffee Fred offered. Didn't expect to find him courting a lady in Nebraska City. "Courting at gunpoint, more like," Fred said with disgust. "What's your plan now? The lady complicates things." Mason stared into the fire. "She does. Can't just leave her, not with Thorne likely to come looking for her, but I can't let him slip away again either." "I heard that," came Eliza's voice from behind them. She emerged from the lean-to, practically swimming in Fred's clothes. The shirt sleeves rolled up several times and the trousers cinched tightly at her waist with a length of rope. Despite the ill-fitting garments, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that Mason couldn't help but admire. "And I won't be left anywhere. That man tried to kill me. I intend to see him face justice." "No offense, madam," Fred said gently, "but hunting a man like Thorne is dangerous business, more dangerous than having already been shot at by him." She countered, accepting the cup of coffee Mason offered. Her hands were steady now. "Besides, I know things about him that might help you catch him, where he's been staying in town, his habits, the people he's been meeting with." Mason and Fred exchanged glances. The woman had a point. "You got family that'll worry?" Mason asked. Pain flashed across Eliza's face. "My mother died when I was 15, my father." She hesitated. "He and I haven't been on speaking terms since I refused Thorne's proposal. He was convinced it was the match of a lifetime." She laughed without humor. "I suppose in a way he was right. It nearly was the last match of my lifetime." "What about going to the law?" Fred suggested. Eliza shook her head. "Sheriff Burnett is my father's cousin. He already thinks I'm being difficult about the whole situation." She sipped her coffee, grimacing at its strength. "Besides, even if he did believe me, he's no match for a man like Thorne." Mason considered their options. He hadn't planned on having companions for this hunt, especially not a woman. But leaving Eliza unprotected wasn't an option, and he had to admit her knowledge of Thorne's recent movements could prove valuable. "All right," he said finally. "But you follow our lead, stay back when we tell you to, and if things go sideways, you run, no heroics." "Deal?" Eliza's chin lifted. "Deal?" Fred stood, stretching his tall frame. "Well, if we're doing this, we'd best get moving. That storm's blown over and daylight's wasting." He glanced at Eliza. We'll need to get the lady some proper clothes and a horse. I have money, she said. And there's a trading post about 5 miles upriver. The owner, Jacob Winters, is an honest man. He won't ask too many questions. As they broke camp and prepared to ride, Mason found himself studying Eliza as she helped Fred pack away his cooking gear. There was something compelling about her, not just her beauty, though she was certainly beautiful despite her bedraggled state, but the steel beneath her gentle exterior. Most women would be hysterical after what she'd endured, yet here she was, planning their next move. When it came time to mount up, Mason offered Eliza his hand. As he pulled her up behind him, she hesitated only briefly before wrapping her arms around his waist. "Thank you," she said softly, her breath warm against his neck, "for pulling me from the river, for believing me." Mason didn't respond immediately. He wasn't used to gratitude. In his line of work, people either feared him or tolerated him for his usefulness. This simple human connection felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. "Just doing what needed doing," he finally replied. As they rode toward the trading post, Mason remained vigilant, scanning the landscape for any sign of Thorne. The man was cunning, ruthless. He'd likely assume Eliza had drowned, but a man like that left nothing to chance. They needed to move quickly, stay unpredictable. What Mason couldn't predict was how the woman riding behind him, her arms trustingly circling his waist, would soon change the course of his carefully planned life. The trading post was a sturdy log building with a broad porch, nestled in a clearing surrounded by cottonwoods and oaks. A weathered sign proclaimed it Winters Trading and Supply. Several horses were hitched outside and smoke curled from a stone chimney. "Popular place," Fred remarked as they approached. "It's the only store for miles," Eliza explained. "Travelers, settlers, and river men all stop here. Jacob keeps a good stock and fair prices." Mason dismounted first, helping Eliza down. She swayed slightly, still weak from her ordeal, but stubbornly straightened her shoulders. "Wait here," he told Fred. "Keep an eye out." Inside, the trading post was crowded with good shelves of canned foods and dry goods, barrels of flour and sugar, racks of tools and weapons. A heavy-set man with a salt and pepper beard stood behind a counter, talking animatedly with 2 customers. He looked up as they entered, his eyes widening at the sight of Eliza in her oversized men's clothing. "Miss Clarke," he exclaimed. "Good Lord, what's happened to you?" Eliza stepped forward. "Hello, Mr. Winters. I find myself in need of some supplies, urgently." The storekeeper shooed away his other customers with surprising speed, then ushered Eliza and Mason to a quieter corner of the store. "Your father's been in here raising hell since yesterday, saying you'd run off," Winters said, concern evident in his voice. "But you look like you've been through something worse than a family spat." "I need your discretion, Mr. Winters," Eliza said quietly. "Harold Thompson tried to kill me this afternoon." Winters' face darkened. "That smooth-talking city fellow, I never did trust him, too polished by half." He glanced at Mason. "And you are Mason Quinn. I happened to be nearby when it occurred." The storekeeper studied Mason with shrewd eyes. "Quinn, the bounty hunter." When Mason nodded, Winters let out a low whistle. "So Thompson's got a price on his head, does he?" "A substantial one," Mason confirmed. "His real name is Harlan Thorne." Recognition flashed across Winters' face. "The train robber, the one who killed those guards in Wyoming." He looked at Eliza with new understanding. "No wonder you're dressed like that and looking like you've been dragged through hell backwards." "What do you need?" "Clothes," Eliza said. "Something practical for riding, and a horse if you have one to sell or know where I might obtain one quickly." "Got a mare out back I was planning to sell next month. She's gentle but strong." Winters eyed Eliza's slight frame. "Might be more horse than you're used to, though." "I can handle her," Eliza said with quiet confidence. "I've been riding since I could walk." Winters nodded. "As for clothes, my wife's sister left some things here last visit. She's a bit taller than you, but they'll fit better than what you're swimming in now." He hesitated. "This is going to cost a pretty penny, Miss Clarke, are you sure?" Eliza pulled a small leather pouch from inside Fred's oversized shirt. "I always keep emergency funds sewn into my clothing, Mr. Winters, a habit my mother taught me." She emptied several gold coins onto the counter. "Will this cover everything, including your silence?" Winters' eyebrows rose at the sight of the gold, but he quickly swept it into his palm. "More than enough. Wait here." When he disappeared into a back room, Mason turned to Eliza with newfound respect. Emergency funds, a small smile touched her lips. My mother believed a woman should always be prepared to leave at a moment's notice. She called it independence insurance. Smart woman. Yes, she was. Sadness flickered across Eliza's face. She would have seen through Thorne immediately. Winters returned with an armload of clothing, a riding skirt, several shirtwaists, a leather vest, undergarments, and a sturdy jacket. There's a room upstairs you can use to change, he told Eliza. I'll sort out some provisions while you're doing that. When Eliza descended the stairs 15 minutes later, Mason barely recognized her. Gone was the bedraggled victim in oversized men's clothing. In her place stood a composed, capable-looking woman in a practical dark blue riding outfit. She'd somehow managed to tame her auburn hair into a neat braid and wash the mud from her face. Only the lingering pallor of her skin and the slight shadows beneath her eyes hinted at her recent trauma. Better, she asked, catching his gaze. Much, Mason replied, suddenly aware he was staring. You clean up nice. A hint of color touched her cheeks. Thank you for everything. Winters had assembled an impressive collection of supplies, food, canteens, blankets, even a small medical kit. He'd added a lady's saddle and tack for the mare and thrown in a Winchester rifle and ammunition at no extra charge. The mare's name is Penny, he told Eliza as they loaded the supplies. She's sound and sure-footed if a bit strong-willed. Like her new owner, Mason commented, earning a surprised glance from Eliza. Outside, Fred was still keeping watch, looking relieved when they emerged. His eyebrows rose appreciatively at Eliza's transformation. Madam, he said with a respectful nod, you're looking more yourself. Thank you, Mr. Daly, she replied with a small smile. And please call me Eliza. I think pulling someone from a river earns you first-name privileges. As they prepared to leave, Winters drew Mason aside. Quinn, a word. His voice dropped lower. Two fellows came through here about an hour before you arrived. One matched Thompson's or Thorne's description. He was with a hard-looking character, both armed to the teeth. They were asking about river crossings south of here. Mason's jaw tightened. Did they mention anything else? A woman, maybe, Winters shook his head. No, but Thorne seemed mighty agitated, kept looking out the window, checking his pocket watch. They bought supplies for several days' travel. Which way were they headed? South, toward Brownville, said something about catching a steamboat. Winters glanced at Eliza, who was getting acquainted with her new mount under Fred's guidance. You watch out for her, Quinn. Clarke is a prominent name in these parts. Her father's got influence, and if he's taken a shine to Thorne, there could be trouble beyond just the outlaw himself. Mason nodded grimly. Appreciated. As they rode away from the trading post, Mason shared what Winters had told him. Eliza's face grew troubled. Brownville makes sense, she said. There's regular steamboat service to St. Louis from there. If he reaches the city, he could disappear completely. Not if we catch him first, Fred said with determination. Brownville's what, 30 miles from here? Closer to 25, Eliza corrected. But the road's not direct. We'd make better time cutting across country following the river part of the way. Mason studied her with renewed interest. You know this area well. I've lived here all my life, she replied. My father owns one of the largest farms in the county. I used to ride all over these parts before. She hesitated. Before he decided it wasn't ladylike enough, and that my time would be better spent learning to be a proper wife. The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable, and Mason found himself wondering about the life she'd led before Thorne entered it. She rode with the easy confidence of someone born to the saddle, handled her new mount with gentle but firm authority, and clearly possessed a keen mind. What kind of father would try to stifle such spirit? They rode hard for the remainder of the afternoon, Eliza setting a pace that impressed even Mason. The mare, Penny, proved to be an excellent mount, responsive and tireless. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, they reached a high bluff overlooking the Missouri River, its waters now calm in the fading light. We should make camp, Fred suggested, nodding toward a protected hollow nearby. Continue at first light. Mason agreed, though he could tell Eliza was reluctant to stop. As they set up camp, he noticed her wincing slightly when she dismounted, the adrenaline of the day finally wearing off to reveal the toll her ordeal had taken on her body. You should rest, he told her, helping her spread a blanket near the small fire Fred had built. We've got a long ride tomorrow. I'm fine, she insisted, but the fatigue in her voice betrayed her. Sure you are, Mason replied dryly, and I'm the Queen of England. That startled a laugh from her, a genuine sound that transformed her face, illuminating it with a warmth that made Mason's chest tighten unexpectedly. Very well, Your Majesty, she conceded with a mock curtsy. I will obey your royal command. As darkness fell, they ate a simple meal of beans, jerky, and biscuits from their supplies. The night was clear, stars spreading across the sky in a glittering canopy. Mason took the first watch, settling on a rock outcropping with a clear view of the surrounding terrain. He hadn't been there long when soft footsteps approached. Eliza appeared beside him, wrapped in her blanket against the cooling night air. You should be sleeping, he said, but there was no reproach in his tone. I tried, she replied, sitting beside him. Every time I close my eyes, I feel the water closing over me again, she shuddered. I keep hearing the gunshot, feeling the bullet pass so close. Without thinking, Mason put his arm around her shoulders. She stiffened momentarily, then relaxed against him, accepting the comfort. I've never been so scared, she admitted quietly. Not just of dying, but of disappearing, of no one ever knowing what happened to me, of him getting away with it. She looked up at Mason. Is that strange? No, he said, understanding completely. In his years as a bounty hunter, he'd seen too many unmarked graves, too many families left without answers. It's not strange at all. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the soft hooting of an owl and the distant rush of the river. Why did you become a bounty hunter? Eliza asked eventually. Mason considered the question. Few people asked him that, most were too intimidated or too judgmental to care about his reasons. My father was killed when I was 16, he said finally, shot in the back by a man he trusted. The local law didn't do much, claimed there wasn't enough evidence, so I tracked the killer myself. The memory was still sharp, even after 12 years. Found him in a saloon in Omaha, drunk and bragging about getting away with murder. What did you do? Eliza's voice was barely audible. I was going to kill him, Mason admitted. Had my father's revolver in my hand, finger on the trigger, but a bounty hunter named Davis was there, tracking the same man for another crime. He stopped me, told me there were better ways to get justice. He smiled faintly at the memory. Took me under his wing, taught me the trade. Turned out the man who killed my father had a sizable bounty on his head. The money helped my mother keep our farm. And you've been doing it ever since? Mason nodded. 15 years now. Davis passed on 5 years ago. Consumption took him. But I kept at it. He looked out over the moonlit landscape. Been thinking lately it might be time to stop, though. Find a piece of land somewhere, put down roots. That sounds nice, Eliza said softly. Roots. Something in her tone made Mason look down at her. In the moonlight, her profile was delicate yet strong, her eyes reflecting the stars above. What about you? He asked. What does Eliza Clarke want from life? She considered the question seriously. Freedom, she finally answered. To make my own choices, to use my mind. She smiled ruefully. My father thinks education is wasted on women. He nearly had an apoplexy when I expressed interest in attending the women's college in Lincoln. You're smart enough for it, Mason observed. Eliza looked surprised by the compliment. Thank you, I've always loved learning. Reading, mathematics, natural sciences. My mother encouraged it before she died. She sighed. After that, father became more traditional in his views. When Thorne appeared with his talk of business opportunities and investments, father saw him as the perfect solution to the problem of his too educated daughter. His loss, Mason said simply. They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence filled with new understanding. Eventually, Eliza's head began to nod, exhaustion finally claiming her. Mason guided her gently back to her bedroll by the fire. Sleep, he told her. I'll wake you if there's trouble. She caught his hand as he turned to leave. Thank you, Mason, not just for saving my life, but for listening. He squeezed her hand briefly, then returned to his watch post, more determined than ever to catch Thorne and ensure Eliza's safety. And perhaps, he admitted to himself, for reasons that went beyond professional duty or the bounty on Thorne's head. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, promising a fine day for travel. Eliza woke feeling remarkably refreshed despite her ordeal the previous day. The men were already up, Fred preparing a simple breakfast while Mason studied a rough map he'd sketched in the dirt. "Morning," Fred greeted her cheerfully. "Coffee's hot if you want some." "Thank you." Eliza accepted the tin cup gratefully, joining Mason by his improvised map. "Planning our route," he nodded. "If Thorne's heading for Brownville, he'll likely take the main road. It's longer but easier going. If we cut across country here," he traced a line with a stick, "we could intercept him before he reaches town." "There's a ford about 5 miles downstream," Eliza suggested, kneeling beside him and pointing to a spot on his map. "And an old trapper's cabin nearby where we could rest the horses before the final push to Brownville." Mason looked impressed. "You really do know this country." "Told you," she said with a small smile. "I used to ride everywhere before my father decided it wasn't proper." They broke camp quickly after breakfast, eager to make up time. As they rode, Eliza noticed Mason watching her with an unreadable expression. "What?" she finally asked. "Just thinking," he replied, "that you're not what I expected." "And what did you expect?" he considered for a moment. "When a woman gets shot at and nearly drowned, I expect hysteria, not someone who can ride like you, navigate like you, and keep up with 2 seasoned men without complaint." "Disappointed?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. "Impressed," he corrected. "Very impressed." Fred, riding slightly ahead, called back to them. "River's just beyond that ridge. Ford should be visible from there." They urged their horses up the gentle slope, emerging onto a bluff overlooking the Missouri. The river stretched wide and placid below them, golden in the morning light. "There," Eliza pointed to a section where the water seemed shallower, rippling over a submerged sandbar. "That's the ford." They were about to descend when Mason suddenly raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He dismounted silently, moving to the edge of the bluff and dropping to a crouch. Eliza and Fred followed his example, approaching cautiously. Below them, barely visible through the trees along the riverbank, were 2 riders. Even from this distance, Eliza recognized Thorne's distinctive black hat and the arrogant set of his shoulders. The other man was heavily built, with a bushy beard and a rifle slung across his back. "That's him," she whispered, her heart suddenly pounding. "The one in the black hat." Mason nodded grimly. "And that's Silas Burke with him. Nasty piece of work. Wanted in 3 territories for armed robbery and murder." "They're stopping," Fred observed quietly. Indeed, Thorne and his companion had halted near the ford, dismounting and leading their horses to drink. They appeared to be taking a rest, unaware of the watchers on the bluff. "This is our chance," Mason said, his voice low and steady. "They're in the open, no cover. We have the high ground." Fred nodded, already checking his revolver. "What's the plan?" Mason thought for a moment. "We'll approach from 3 sides. I'll circle around downstream, come up behind them. Fred, you take position on that outcropping to the north. You'll have a clear shot if things go wrong. Eliza, you stay here. If they try to escape upriver, you can warn us with a shot in the air." "I can shoot," Eliza said firmly. "My father may have disapproved of my riding, but he insisted I learn to handle firearms. Every frontier woman should know how to protect herself, he always said." The irony of using skills her father had taught her against the man he'd chosen as her husband wasn't lost on her. Mason studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but stay under cover. If anything happens to me and Fred, you ride hard for Nebraska City. Find the federal marshal, not your father's cousin. Understand?" "I understand," she assured him, though she had no intention of fleeing if things went badly. They separated, moving with careful silence into their positions. Eliza crouched behind a fallen log, the Winchester rifle ready in her hands. From her vantage point, she could see Thorne and Burke clearly. They were eating, seemingly in no hurry, confident in their escape. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as she waited for Mason to get into position. She could see Fred now, a barely discernible shape among the rocks to the north. Of Mason there was no sign, but she trusted he was making his way silently downstream. Then she saw him, a flicker of movement in the brush behind Thorne and Burke. Mason, moving with the stealth of a mountain lion. Her breath caught as he emerged, revolver drawn. "Harlan Thorne," Mason's voice rang out clear and commanding. "Silas Burke, you're wanted men. Throw down your weapons." Thorne and Burke spun around, hands dropping to their guns. Fred rose from his position, rifle aimed. "Don't try it," he warned. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then Burke went for his gun with lightning speed. Fred's rifle cracked and Burke staggered, clutching his arm, but Thorne was already moving, diving behind a boulder and returning fire. The peaceful morning erupted into chaos. Gunshots echoed off the bluff as Mason took cover behind a tree, exchanging fire with Thorne. Burke, wounded but still dangerous, was firing wildly toward Fred's position. Eliza watched in horror as Mason darted from one tree to another, trying to flank Thorne. A bullet splintered Burke inches from his head. He was pinned down, unable to advance without exposing himself to Thorne's fire. Fred was having his own problems. Burke had recovered enough to take a more protected position and was now methodically firing at any movement from Fred's direction. Eliza knew she had to act. From her elevated position, she had a clear view of both outlaws. Raising the Winchester to her shoulder, she took careful aim at a rock just behind Thorne's position. She fired. The bullet struck with a sharp crack, sending stone fragments flying. Thorne flinched, momentarily distracted. It was all Mason needed. He lunged forward, firing twice. Thorne yelled in pain, his gun falling from his hand as he clutched his shoulder. But Burke had spotted Eliza now. He swung his rifle toward her, taking aim. She ducked as a bullet whistled over her head, then rolled to a different position. Heart-pounding, she chambered another round and fired at Burke. She missed, but it forced him to seek better cover, giving Fred the opportunity to advance. The firefight continued for several more tense minutes. Eliza fired sparingly, each shot carefully placed to distract or disrupt the outlaws' aim rather than hit them directly. Her strategy worked. Mason was able to close in on Thorne while Fred kept Burke occupied. Finally, Mason reached Thorne's position. Eliza heard a brief struggle, a shout of pain, then Mason's voice ringing out, "I've got Thorne. Burke, throw down your weapon or your partner gets another bullet." There was a moment of tense silence, then the clatter of a rifle being dropped. "Don't shoot," Burke called. "I'm coming out." Eliza watched as Burke emerged, hands raised. Fred approached cautiously, his rifle trained on the outlaw's chest. When he was certain Burke was unarmed, he quickly bound the man's hands behind his back. Only then did Eliza descend from her position, her legs shaky with ebbing adrenaline. As she approached, she saw Mason hauling a bloodied Thorne to his feet. The man who had courted her, who had seemed so refined and gentlemanly, now looked like what he truly was, a dangerous criminal. Thorne's eyes widened in shock when he saw her. "Eliza, you're alive." His surprise quickly turned to rage. "You little bitch, you set me up," Mason jerked him roughly. "Watch your mouth, the lady didn't set you up. She just had the good sense to see through you before it was too late." Eliza approached slowly, her rifle still in hand. She stopped a few feet from Thorne, looking him directly in the eyes. The man who had terrified her, who had nearly killed her, suddenly seemed diminished. "You made a mistake, Harlan," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You thought because I was a woman I'd be easy prey. You were wrong." Thorne spat at her feet. "Your father will never believe you. He thinks the sun rises and sets on me. By the time we reach Nebraska City, it'll be your word against mine, and we both know who he'll believe." "That's why we're not going to Nebraska City," Mason cut in. "We're taking you to Brownville, to the federal marshal there. Your days of charming your way out of trouble are over, Thorne." They secured both prisoners on their horses, binding their hands to their saddle horns. Mason checked Thorne's wound, painful but not life-threatening, the bullet having passed through the fleshy part of his shoulder. Burke's injury was similar, a clean shot through his upper arm. As they prepared to cross the ford, Mason approached Eliza. "You did well up there," he said quietly. "Those were smart shots, creating distraction without trying to hit them directly." "I've never shot at a person before," she admitted. "I wasn't sure I could." "Sometimes not shooting directly at someone takes more skill and courage than trying to kill them," he replied. "You helped turn the tide without taking a life. That's something to be proud of." His words warmed her, and she realized how much his good opinion had come to matter to her in their short acquaintance. There was something about Mason Quinn that spoke to her on a level she'd never experienced before, a sense of being truly seen and respected for who she was, not who someone wanted her to be. They crossed the river without incident, the water barely reaching the horses' bellies at the ford. On the other side, they set a steady pace toward Brownville, keeping the prisoners between them. Fred rode point, with Mason bringing up the rear and Eliza in the middle, her rifle across her lap. Thorne remained sullenly silent, but Burke seemed inclined to talk, perhaps hoping to improve his situation through cooperation. "Didn't know he was planning to kill no woman," he told Eliza as they rode. "That ain't my style. Robbery's one thing, but shooting ladies." He shook his head disapprovingly. "Yet you helped him try to escape afterward," she pointed out coldly. Burke shrugged his uninjured shoulder. "He paid good money. Said we was running from a jealous husband, not the law. By the time I figured differently, we was already on the road." He glanced at her curiously. "How'd you survive anyway? Saw him shoot you right into that river." "The bullet missed," Eliza replied simply, "and I can swim." "Lucky," Burke muttered. "Skill," Mason corrected from behind them. "And the good sense to have two men nearby who weren't about to let her drown." They made good time, reaching Brownville by mid-afternoon. The town was larger than Eliza had expected, bustling with activity from the steamboat landing. Warehouses lined the riverfront, while the main street boasted several substantial brick buildings alongside more typical wooden structures. The federal marshal's office was easy to find, a solid brick building with a sign proclaiming U.S. Marshal Service hanging outside. As they dismounted, a small crowd began to gather, curious about the bound and bloodied men. Inside, they found Marshal James Hartley, a tall, gray-haired man with piercing blue eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He recognized Mason immediately. "Quinn," he said, rising from behind his desk. "Didn't expect to see you in these parts. What brings you to my jurisdiction?" Mason gestured to their prisoners. "Harlan Thorne and Silas Burke, wanted in Wyoming, Colorado, and Kansas territories." Hartley's eyebrows rose. "Well now, that is a catch, the Cheyenne robbery." "Among others," Mason confirmed. "And the lady?" Hartley asked, nodding toward Eliza. "Miss Eliza Clarke," Mason introduced her. "Thorne's latest victim, though she turned the tables on him rather impressively." Eliza stepped forward. "Marshal, I need to make a formal statement. This man," she pointed to Thorne, "attempted to murder me yesterday near Nebraska City. He shot at me and left me to drown in the Missouri River." Hartley studied her with newfound interest. "That's so. Well, miss, we'll certainly add attempted murder to his charges. I'll need your full statement." For the next hour, Eliza recounted everything: Thorne's arrival in Nebraska City under a false name, his courtship, her refusal, his threats, and finally the shooting at the river. The marshal listened intently, taking detailed notes. "This is serious business," he said when she'd finished. "But it's your word against his, and from what you've told me, your father might take his side." "I have witnesses," Eliza replied firmly. "Mr. Quinn saw the shooting. Mr. Daly helped rescue me from the river, and Mr. Winters at the trading post can confirm parts of my story." Hartley nodded. "Good, that helps." He turned to Mason. "The bounty on these two is substantial. It'll take a few days to process the paperwork and get the money from the territorial office. You planning to stick around?" Mason glanced at Eliza before answering. "Yes, we'll be staying." After Thorne and Burke were securely locked in the jail cells behind the marshal's office, Hartley suggested they find accommodations at the Riverview Hotel, a respectable establishment overlooking the Missouri. "Best place in town," he assured them, "and they don't ask too many questions." As they walked the short distance to the hotel, Eliza became acutely aware of her appearance: travel-stained, disheveled, and still wearing the borrowed clothes from Winter's trading post. She must look a sight, yet neither Mason nor Fred seemed to notice or care. The Riverview Hotel proved to be a handsome 3-story brick building with wide verandas and clean, well-appointed rooms. The proprietress, Mrs. Hammond, a formidable widow with sharp eyes and a kind smile, took one look at Eliza and immediately understood the situation. "Running from trouble, are we, dear?" she asked quietly as she showed Eliza to her room. "Something like that," Eliza admitted. "Is it that obvious?" Mrs. Hammond patted her arm. "I've been running this hotel for 30 years, child. I know the look of someone who's had to leave in a hurry." She glanced meaningfully at Eliza's ill-fitting clothes. "Tell you what, my daughter left some dresses here last time she visited. About your size, I'd say. You're welcome to borrow them until you can sort yourself out." "That's very kind," Eliza said gratefully. "I can pay, of course." "We'll discuss that later. For now, I'll have a bath sent up and something hot to eat. Those men of yours look like they could use the same." "They're not my men," Eliza protested, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. Mrs. Hammond gave her a knowing look. "If you say so, dear." especially not that tall, dark-haired one who hasn't taken his eyes off you since you walked in. With a meaningful smile, she left Eliza alone with her thoughts. The hot bath was heavenly, washing away the last traces of river mud and the lingering chill that had settled in her bones. Afterward, wrapped in a soft robe provided by Mrs. Hammond, Eliza examined the dresses left for her use. They were simple but well-made: a blue day dress, a more formal brown silk, and a practical gray traveling outfit. All needed minor adjustments to fit her properly, but they were far better than what she currently had. A knock at her door announced the arrival of a tray laden with food: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie. Eliza realized she was ravenous. Having eaten little since their hasty breakfast that morning, she had just finished eating when another knock came. Opening the door cautiously, she found Mason standing there, freshly bathed and changed himself, his dark hair still damp. "Wanted to check on you," he said. "Make sure you're settling in all right." "I am, thank you," she replied, suddenly conscious of being in only a robe. "Mrs. Hammond has been very kind," Mason nodded. "Good woman, known her for years." He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "Listen, Eliza, we need to talk about what happens next." "Come in," she said, opening the door wider. "It's not proper, but then, nothing about this situation is." He entered, carefully keeping a respectful distance. "The marshal says it'll take 3 days at least to process the bounty paperwork. After that," he trailed off. "After that, you'll be moving on," Eliza finished for him. The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. "That was the plan," he admitted, "but plans can change." He looked at her directly, his dark eyes serious. "What about you? Will you return to Nebraska City?" Eliza sighed, moving to the window that overlooked the river. Steamboats plied the waters, coming and going with goods and passengers, each representing a different destination, a different possibility. "I don't know," she said honestly. "My father. Even if he believes what happened, he'll see it as confirmation that I need protection, that I can't be trusted to make my own decisions." She turned back to Mason. "I can't live like that anymore, not after everything that's happened." "You could stay here," he suggested. "Brownville seems like a decent town, or go to Lincoln like you wanted. Attend that women's college. With what money?" she asked practically. "What I had was enough for emergency supplies, not starting a new life." Mason was quiet for a moment. "Then the bounty on Thorne and Burke is $3,000. You're entitled to a share." Eliza stared at him in surprise. "Me, but I didn't capture them. You and Fred did." "You helped," he pointed out. "More than helped. You provided crucial information, you participated in the capture, and most importantly, you're the victim who's testifying against Thorne. Without you, he might talk his way out of the murder charges in Wyoming. They've never been able to prove he was the one who actually shot the guards." She hadn't considered that aspect. If her testimony strengthened the case against Thorne for his previous crimes as well as his attack on her, it could indeed be valuable. "How would this work?" she asked cautiously. "We split 3 ways," Mason said simply. "You, me, and Fred. $1,000 each. $1,000. It was a fortune enough to pay for several years at the women's college in Lincoln, with money left over to establish herself afterward, enough for a real fresh start." "Why would you do this?" she asked, searching his face for answers. "You barely know me." Mason stepped closer, his expression open and earnest. "Maybe that's true, but I know enough. I know you're brave and smart and determined. I know you deserve better than being forced into marriage with a killer or controlled by a father who doesn't appreciate who you really are." His voice softened. "And I know that in the short time since I pulled you from that river, something's changed for me, something important." Eliza's heart beat faster. "What do you mean?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "I mean that for 15 years I've been a drifter, moving from town to town, bounty to bounty, never staying, never connecting. It suited me fine." His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Until now." "Mason," she whispered, not trusting her voice for more. "I'm not asking for anything," he assured her quickly. "Just telling you that whatever you decide to do next, I'd like to be part of it somehow." He stepped back, giving her space. "Think about the bounty share. It's yours regardless of anything else between us." After he left, Eliza sat by the window for a long time, watching the river flow endlessly southward. For the first time in years, she felt truly free to choose her own path. The question was which path to take. The next 3 days in Brownville passed in a blur of activity. Marshal Hartley took formal statements from all of them, preparing the paperwork to transfer Thorne and Burke to territorial authorities. Eliza visited a dressmaker to have Mrs. Hammond's daughter's dresses properly altered, and purchased a few essential items with some of her remaining funds. Fred proved to be excellent company during their wait, regaling them with stories of his adventures as a cowhand across the Western Territories. He was planning to use his share of the bounty to buy a small cattle operation in Nebraska, having tired of working for others. Man needs his own place eventually, he explained over dinner one evening. Something that's his that he built with his own 2 hands. Mason nodded in agreement. Been thinking the same myself lately. That land near San Francisco still in your sights? Fred asked. Mason glanced briefly at Eliza before answering. Maybe, or maybe somewhere closer to here. Nebraska has good land too. Eliza tried not to read too much into his words, but her heart fluttered traitorously at the implication. On their 3rd evening in Brownville, a telegram arrived from Nebraska City. It was from Eliza's father, demanding she return home immediately. Someone had recognized her in town and reported back to him. He says if I don't come home, he'll send men to fetch me, Eliza told Mason and Fred as they sat on the hotel veranda after dinner. Claims I've been abducted and corrupted by unsavory characters. Fred chuckled. Unsavory, are we? I've been called worse. But Mason wasn't amused. What will you do? He asked Eliza. She folded the telegram carefully and tucked it into her pocket. I'm not going back, not yet anyway, not until I can return on my terms as my own woman. She looked at Mason steadily. I've decided to accept your offer of a share in the bounty. I'm going to enroll in the women's college in Lincoln for the fall term. Mason's face lit up with a smile that transformed his usually serious features. Good. That's good, Eliza. The next morning, Marshal Hartley summoned them to his office. The paperwork had been processed more quickly than expected, and the bounty was ready to be paid. $3,000, gentlemen, he said, placing a heavy pouch on his desk. And lady, he added with a respectful nod to Eliza. You've done a service to the territories by bringing these men to justice. As agreed, the bounty was divided equally between the 3 of them. Eliza felt strange accepting such a large sum more money than she'd ever handled at one time, but the marshal himself confirmed she'd earned it. Without your testimony, Miss, Thorne might have wiggled out of the worst charges again. He's slippery as an eel, that one, but not this time. Hartley looked genuinely pleased. The territorial judge arrives tomorrow. After he hears your statements, Thorne and Burke will be transferred to Cheyenne to stand trial for the train robbery and murders. Outside the marshal's office, Fred announced his intention to depart the next day. Got a ranch to find, he said cheerfully. But I expect I'll see you both again someday. Count on it, Mason replied, clasping the cowboy's hand firmly. We owe you, Fred. Nah, Fred grinned. Just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Besides, made myself a nice profit for my trouble. He tipped his hat to Eliza. Miss Clarke, it's been a genuine pleasure. Not every day a man gets to rescue a lady as brave and capable as yourself. Thank you, Fred, she said warmly, impulsively rising on tiptoe to kiss his weathered cheek. For everything. After Fred left them, Mason and Eliza walked slowly back toward the hotel. The evening was mild, the setting sun painting the Missouri River with streaks of gold and crimson. So, Mason said after a comfortable silence, Lincoln, when will you go? The fall term begins in September, she replied. That gives me 2 months to make arrangements, find lodging, purchase books and supplies. She glanced at him. What about you? Will you head to San Francisco now? He stopped walking, turning to face her. Actually, I've been thinking about that. His expression was serious but warm. The land I was looking at in California, it was just a dream, really, something to aim for, but lately I've been wondering if maybe I was looking in the wrong place all along. Eliza's heart began to race. What do you mean? I mean, he said carefully, that there's good land here in Nebraska, and now I have the money to buy it. He took a deep breath. But land's not much use without something else, something more important. And what's that? She asked, hardly daring to hope. A reason, he said simply. A purpose, someone to build it for with. He took her hands in his. Eliza, I know it's fast. We've only known each other a few days, but I've lived enough to recognize something real when I find it, and what I feel for you is more real than anything I've ever known. Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes. Mason, I'm not asking you to give up your dreams, he continued quickly. Lincoln's not far from here. You could attend your college and I could find land nearby. We could. See where this leads. No pressure, no expectations, just possibility. Eliza looked up at this man who had saved her life, who had seen her strength when others saw only weakness, who offered her freedom instead of constraints. In his dark eyes she saw respect, admiration, and yes, the beginnings of love. I think, she said softly, that sounds like the most wonderful possibility I've ever heard. He smiled then, a smile that reached his eyes and warmed her to her toes. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand, but when she responded, sliding her arms around his neck, it deepened into something more urgent, more promising. When they finally broke apart, both breathing faster, Mason rested his forehead against hers. I was right, he murmured. About what? The day I pulled you from the river. I told Fred you weren't dying alone. Turns out I was saving my own future too. The next morning, Fred departed as planned, riding north toward the cattle country he hoped to make his home. He left with warm handshakes, promises to write, and an open invitation to visit once he was settled. Eliza and Mason remained in Brownville 2 more days, staying to testify before the territorial judge. It was a grueling experience for Eliza, facing Thorne across the courtroom, enduring his cold glare and occasional muttered threats. But Mason was beside her throughout, his solid presence giving her strength. The judge was impressed by her clear, detailed testimony and unshakable composure under questioning. When Thorne tried to claim that she had led him on, then spurned him cruelly, she countered with such dignity and conviction that even Thorne's assigned defender looked embarrassed to be representing him. In the end, the judge ordered both men transferred to Wyoming territory to stand trial for the train robbery and murders. He added attempted murder charges based on Eliza's testimony, ensuring that even if somehow Thorne escaped the murder conviction, he would still face serious consequences for his attack on her. As Thorne was led away in chains, he shot Eliza one last venomous glance. This isn't over, he spat. Your father, my father, will hear the truth from me, Eliza interrupted calmly. And unlike you, Harlan, I don't need to lie to be believed. With Thorne and Burke on their way to Wyoming under heavy guard, Eliza and Mason were free to plan their next steps. They decided to travel to Lincoln together, where Eliza would secure lodgings near the college and Mason would explore land opportunities in the surrounding area. Before leaving Brownville, Eliza wrote a long letter to her father, explaining everything that had happened and her plans for the future. She was firm but not unkind, expressing hope that he would eventually understand and respect her choices. Do you think he will? Mason asked as she sealed the envelope. I don't know, she admitted. He's stubborn, set in his ways, but he's still my father. I have to believe that somewhere beneath his old-fashioned ideas, he loves me and wants me to be happy. And are you? Mason asked quietly. Happy? Eliza looked at him, this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and changed everything. Yes, she said simply. For the first time in years, I truly am. They left Brownville on a bright summer morning, riding side by side along the road that would eventually lead them to Lincoln. The future stretched before them, full of possibilities neither had imagined just a week earlier. As the town receded behind them, Eliza felt a profound sense of rightness, of finally traveling a path of her own choosing. What are you thinking? Mason asked, noticing her contemplative expression. I'm thinking about rivers, she replied. How they can try to drown you or they can carry you to someplace new. She smiled at him, her heart full. I'm glad this one carried me to you. He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. And I'm glad I heard someone say you were drowning. Best thing I ever heard, as it turns out. As they rode toward their future together, Eliza thought about all the twists and turns of fate that had brought them to this moment. A rejected proposal, a murderous outlaw, a desperate plunge into churning waters, and a cowboy's simple, profound declaration. Then she ain't dying alone. She hadn't died that day. Instead, she'd been reborn into a life of her own making with a man who saw her true worth at her side. And that, Eliza decided, was a far better ending than she could ever have imagined for herself. 5 years later, 1883, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the farmhouse, casting warm golden light across the kitchen where Eliza Quinn stood kneading bread dough. Outside, the Nebraska prairie stretched in gentle waves of green and gold, punctuated by the darker green of the orchard Mason had planted their first year on the land. "Mama, Mama!" 4-year-old Sarah burst into the kitchen, her dark curls flying behind her. "Papa's back from town and he brought Uncle Fred." Eliza wiped her hands on her apron, smiling at her daughter's excitement. "Did he now? Well, we'd better go welcome him, hadn't we?" She followed Sarah onto the wide front porch just as Mason was dismounting. Fred Daly sat atop his own horse, looking hardly changed from the day they'd met 5 years ago, except perhaps for a few more lines around his eyes and a slightly more prosperous set to his clothes. "Fred," Eliza called warmly, descending the steps to embrace their old friend. "What a wonderful surprise, Mrs. Quinn," Fred said with exaggerated formality, tipping his hat before dismounting and enveloping her in a bear hug. "Still as pretty as the day we pulled you from that river, I see. And you're still a shameless flatterer," she laughed. Mason came up beside them, little Sarah perched on his hip. He looked different from the hard-edged bounty hunter Eliza had first met, more settled, his face softened by happiness and purpose. He'd kept his promise, finding land near enough to Lincoln that Eliza had been able to attend college while they established their farm. She'd graduated 2 years ago, one of the first married women to receive a degree from the institution. "Fred's got news," Mason said, his free arm sliding around Eliza's waist. "Big news." "Oh," Eliza looked at their friend curiously. Fred's weathered face broke into a grin. "Getting married, madam, next month, to the most wonderful, stubborn, beautiful schoolteacher in all of Nebraska, Fred." "That's marvelous," Eliza exclaimed. "Who is she? Do we know her?" Rebecca Sullivan came out from Boston 2 years ago to teach at the school in my town. "Took me 18 months to convince her a crusty old cowboy like me was worth her time." His expression softened, but she finally said yes. "And you've come to invite us to the wedding, I hope?" Eliza asked. "Wouldn't dream of getting hitched without the two people who showed me what real partnership looks like." Fred replied sincerely. Over dinner, they caught up on all that had happened in the year since they'd last seen Fred. His cattle ranch was thriving, as was the town that had grown up nearby. He'd recently been elected to the town council, a responsibility he took with surprising seriousness. "World's changing," he explained. "Need level heads to guide it right." After Sarah had been put to bed with a special story from Uncle Fred, the adults sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nebraska sky. Fred produced a bottle of good whiskey from his saddlebag, and they toasted his upcoming marriage. "Never thought I'd settle down," he admitted. "Figured I'd die with my boots on somewhere, no one to mourn me but my horse." He glanced at Mason and Eliza. "Then I saw you too, how you looked at each other from the very beginning. Made me start thinking maybe there was something to this whole business of finding someone to share your days with." Mason's hand found Eliza's, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of deep love. "Best decision I ever made," he said simply. "Mine too," Eliza agreed softly. After Fred had retired to the guest room, Eliza and Mason remained on the porch swing, gently rocking in the peaceful night. The land around them was quiet except for the occasional call of a night bird or the distant lowing of their cattle. "I had a letter from my father today," Eliza said, resting her head on Mason's shoulder. "Oh, what does the esteemed Mr. Clarke have to say?" There was no bitterness in his tone. Over the years, Eliza's relationship with her father had gradually healed. After Sarah's birth, he had finally visited their farm, grudgingly admitting that Mason was a good provider and that Eliza seemed happy. Since then, his letters had become more frequent and less judgmental. "He's thinking of visiting next month, says he's not getting any younger and he wants to spend more time with his granddaughter." She hesitated. "And he mentioned that he might have been wrong about some things." Mason raised his eyebrows. "Did he now? That's progress." Eliza smiled. "He said seeing how we've built this place together, how we make decisions as equals. It's given him food for thought, as he put it." "Better late than never," Mason said philosophically. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the moon rise over their land. Finally, Mason spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Do you ever think about that day, the river?" "Sometimes," Eliza admitted. "Not the fear or the danger so much anymore. Mostly I think about how everything changed in that moment, how close I came to a completely different life." She turned to look at him. "Do you?" "I think about what I heard," he said. "Those words that changed everything. She's drowning, and then what Fred said, then she ain't dying alone." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing it softly. "Didn't know it then, but those words were the beginning of everything good in my life." "Mine too," Eliza whispered. Later, as they lay in bed with moonlight spilling through the window, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate struggle in a churning river to this peaceful farmhouse, from strangers to lovers to partners in every sense. They had built something precious together, not just a farm or a family, but a life of shared purpose and deep, abiding love. As she drifted towards sleep in the circle of Mason's arms, Eliza remembered something her mother had once told her. That life's most important crossroads often appear suddenly, without warning, forcing quick decisions that can alter everything that follows. That day on the Missouri River had been such a crossroad, a moment of terror that had ultimately led to unimaginable joy. "Mason," she murmured, already half asleep. "MMM." His voice was drowsy, content. "Thank you for saving me." His arms tightened around her. "Always," he promised, "always." And in the quiet Nebraska night, surrounded by the life they'd built together, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that it was a promise he would keep, had already kept in ways that went far beyond that first desperate rescue. They had saved each other, and in doing so, had discovered what it truly meant to live.